Okay, everyone. Well, thanks for joining us. Looks like we'll have a smaller audience today, which is just fantastic. We're this session really is, I suppose, designed to talk. I really wanted to talk to you about this session because it's an exciting topic for me. I've been part of the technology training industry for almost 30 years, and I've seen a number of highly impactful changes in the technology arena that our students and our instructors have been part of. And with each of these inflections, we've been able to help move our students' careers forwards as they adopt or adapt to these new major technology shifts. And cloud just happens to be one of those. So my name is Vic Tagawa. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Sunset Learning, and I'm also an authorized Amazon instructor. So I just happen to teach these classes that we'll be talking about today. You know, I mentioned these industry shifts, and in the mid-'80s, I was involved with a move from the mainframe to distributed computing, where we moved from computing platforms that were effectively in a cloud down to those that were on our premises or within our organizations that were more highly accessible by our organizations. And during that transition, a lot of people needed to get certified on these new distributed computing technologies. And those included some things, some maybe unfamiliar names to some of you, like Novell NetWare and Unix, to more familiar names like Microsoft. And that was another transition. In the early 90s, Microsoft introduced something called Windows New Technology, or NT, which has later been named Microsoft Windows Server, that we're probably more familiar with these days. At the same time, in the early 90s, Cisco systems became a force in the networking world. They were just starting up back then in the mid-'80s. About 2010, Microsoft Office 365 arrived on the scene. And a little later, or probably in the same time frame, we started hearing a lot more buzz around cloud technologies, right? We started hearing about things like AWS and EC2 and those types of things in 2006, and Microsoft Azure came on the scenes in about 2008. Google Cloud introduced their technologies about the same time in 2008. So these are big transitions that are happening in the industry, and people need knowledge and skills to be able to support their careers going forward. And we've been lucky to see all of those things. One of the things we've seen recently is, if you're familiar with the industry analyst Gartner, they said by 2026, public cloud spending will exceed 45% of all enterprise IT spending. Now that's up from less than 17% just this year in 2021. So if you're going to shift your major IT spending from on-premises based investments to the cloud, it's going to have a serious impact on the knowledge and skills that people need that are in the industry today and those that are starting out their careers in the industry. So that's what we're going to be talking about today a little bit. There's some of those trends, what are driving those trends, and how certifications and training can help you move your careers forward. So, and it's a small session. So if you have any questions or you want to interrupt me at any time and ask specific questions, please feel free to come off mute and ask away. Hi, Whitney. All right, like I said, Sunset Learning has been around for a long time. I've been in and out of the organization for many years, as has my co-host here, Mark Wilson, who's one of our instructors, one of our senior instructors here at Sunset Learning. What we're going to be talking about today is really what the cloud is. We'll be talking about cloud adoption. And in that section about cloud adoption, we'll be talking about some of the roadblocks to cloud adoption that all of us can help resolve the problem to. We'll look at career opportunities, and we'll talk about certifications and why they're important. And then we'll talk a little bit, our key marketing person from Sunset Learning is on this call, but she's not feeling well. So I'm going to talk to you about the marketing pieces too. But we have a substantial deal on some of our certification training. So I'd like to introduce you to that too. Okay, so first of all, what is a cloud? And I suppose it doesn't really matter whose definition you look at these days for the cloud. This one happens to be part of the definition that AWS provides. But really, it's the on-demand delivery of IT resources over the internet. And a key component of that is that you pay as you go, right? So maybe to add on to that, instead of having to buy, own, and maintain your physical data center equipment and servers and all of that infrastructure that supports it, you access that and manage it through the cloud in one manner or another, okay? So that's our real definition of the cloud. Now, the thing is that people talk in tongues about the types of clouds, right? So we have these different cloud definitions like cloud, private cloud, or hybrid clouds. So we need to think a little bit about what that's about. In a hybrid, well, let's just throw these up here. In a cloud environment, a pure cloud environment, if you will, all of those infrastructures or those items that we just talked about in that definition are hosted by a cloud provider. And some of the most prominent cloud provider names you think about these days are Amazon with AWS and Microsoft with its Azure offer and Google Cloud, of course. But there's hundreds of other cloud offers out there providing different types of services. So the bottom line there is those services are hosted purely by those providers. You also have this concept of private cloud, which just happens to be some nomenclature that I think vendors came up with more than anybody else, that were not pure cloud providers, but traditionally had a footprint in infrastructure to begin with. Take Cisco Systems, for instance. Cisco offers networking infrastructure and server infrastructure, and they put those infrastructures on premise in somebody's location, or on premises in somebody's location. And through virtualization and other technologies, they enable folks to do a lot of what they do with cloud services in the cloud model through vendors like AWS, but they're doing it on-prem. So the nomenclature there has become private cloud. Those things that you own and you host within your own organization, your data centers are now your private clouds. So to me, that one's a little bit of a misnomer. That's just premises-based equipment and technologies. You also have this notion of hybrid cloud, where you're hosting some of your applications and application infrastructures on premises, but you're also using some of a cloud provider's resources and maybe even shared between an application. Maybe you have a website or a web presence within the cloud, and there are applications running behind that web service running on premise, because maybe you don't want your database or customer information or that type of information stored in the cloud. You'll keep that on your premises and create a link between your premise location or your premise data center and the cloud. So that would be our definition of hybrid. So hopefully you all are okay with that and have a good understanding of that as we go forward. Now, I'm going to introduce you to some other acronyms. And I don't want you to be scared away by these or anything, but let's take a look at these, because you see these every day these days. You see things like IaaS or PaaS or SaaS or BPaaS. Okay, all of these as a service things. You might even see XaaS, right, which is a reference to everything as a service these days. The idea is when you see infrastructure as a service, it's really talking about this computing infrastructure, the storage infrastructure, and the networking that occurs in the cloud to provide you services so you don't have to buy your own and instantiate those on your own premises. Similarly, platform as a service goes a little bit, it's a layer above infrastructure as a service, but it's kind of the same thing. It says, let's provide you with a platform that is that compute platform and all of that infrastructure underneath it, where you can develop or deploy your own applications to your customers. So that's really just about running applications versus infrastructure as a service, which is more of the physical server devices and the networking devices and those types of components that are being provided to you. Then we have things like software as a service, or the definition of software as a service. And it's really your applications hosted in the cloud. So if you think of something like Salesforce.com, or even Microsoft Office 365. Those services or those productivity applications that live in the cloud are presented to you as software as a service. It could be accounting applications or payroll applications, HR applications, e-commerce applications. All of those things would fall under that software as a service category. Then you also have those outsourced business processes. Again, maybe you use a software as a service infrastructure or application for payroll management, like ADP or something like that. That could be considered a business process service that's outsourced. Another thing might be lead generation that's done as a service for you. That would fall in this business process as a service. So there's a number of other managed services provided by different cloud providers that would fall into that category. And then, of course, becoming more prominent, it was used quite a bit, maybe a decade ago, where it was this idea of virtualized desktop software. And typically those virtual desktops were hosted in the data center. Now these virtualized desktops are hosted in the cloud, right? But this is becoming more and more prominent as people start working from home. Organizations don't necessarily want their customer databases or proprietary data stored on someone's local computer. So instead, desktop as a service gives you the opportunity to present what looks like a desktop on somebody's laptop, but all of the data is stored in the cloud or on your premises location. And people have access to that data, they're just not storing it locally. So that also helps you get around some governance and compliance things that may be necessary for your organization. Does anybody have any questions? Is that stuff sort of clear? Is this useful to you? You can speak up. You can say no. It's okay. All right. Moving forward then, let's take a little bit of a look at the cloud market opportunity and really try to understand what that means to us. If we go, I used to do a lot of work with Gartner in a previous work engagement that I had. And one of the great things about Gartner is they talk to hundreds, if not thousands, of the largest corporations in the world. And they now have a mid-sized business offer as well. And they talk to the CIOs and CTOs in these corporations and they say, hey, what's important to you? And where are you going to be spending your money? According to this study, right? And this study was, it was interesting. I read the study in April, and then it was just updated this month. And when we look at some of these numbers, this tells you how organizations are spending their money on cloud or what they're investing in the cloud. And you'll notice that in 2020, organizations were spending about $313 billion on cloud investment. Notice now over in 2022, we're seeing organizations will be spending almost $480 billion in cloud technologies. And by 2026, Gartner predicts that cloud spending is going to exceed 45% of all IT spending. That's enormous, right? It means we're moving those data centers from on-prem or those private clouds, if you will, into the public cloud, right? And we're going to be taking advantage of these big vendors. And the big three vendors are certainly AWS or Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. So all of those are the big three players out there in the market today. But these numbers don't just reflect those vendors. These numbers also reflect those other 200 smaller cloud providers, and they're growing like crazy as well. Okay. So that is the market opportunity. Oops. Sorry about that. So what's driving all that demand? Well, there's a number of drivers, and I only have a few listed here, but I think the number one driver that has been going on for several years is this idea of digital transformation initiatives that organizations have. And really, digital transformation, although it sounds kind of 1970s, if you will, from that digital term in the front of it, really is a big deal these days. A lot of organizations are hiring chief digital officers to help significantly transform organizations through the use of technology. And so that means changing your business processes and how you service customers, how you provide great customer experiences, et cetera, are all going to be done through the leverage of technology. And as these cloud providers evolve and create new innovative technologies, you can take advantage of those to make those significant changes to your organization. I think the big ones that are occurring today are machine learning and artificial intelligence presented to you through the cloud. And that sort of brings us to this next bullet that talks about speed, agility, innovation, and the globalization of our really of our infrastructures and of our services. We don't want to just reach a small community local. We want to reach out to the rest of the world, right? And be able to sell our services around the world or get our message out to people around the world. It doesn't have to be about money. But this idea of democratization or making available technologies, really the latest IT technologies, to the smallest of businesses, to individuals, all the way up through the largest of corporations. So what the cloud really does is it sort of levels the playing field with regard to the technologies we have access to and how we can leverage those. So then it's just up to the innovation and forward thinking of the organization itself as to how it's going to take advantage of those. Cloud just happens to provide that functionality to everybody. Okay. And then the cost does become a factor in some way, shape, and form. Really, we want a lot of organizations nowadays, especially with uncertainties with the economies, et cetera, want to drive towards variable cost models for IT spending. In the old days, we used to build big siloed data centers. We used to spend a lot of money on real estate and air conditioning and power and those types of things to build these very robust data centers. And then we found during poor economic times or during these big technology transitions, a lot of that investment went unused and was just wasted. So we weren't getting our return on investment that we expected. So being able to pay as you go, it's kind of like leasing a car, right? You pay for it and you may never get it paid off, but you pay as you go. And if you decide you don't want anymore, you can turn it back in and you're not paying for it anymore. So driving towards a variable cost model, or you might hear capital expenditures moving to a operations expenditure type model is something that is driving this demand as well. Any other thoughts there by anybody? Okay, let's keep going then. There's a problem, however, in reaching all of those goals and with everybody making all of these expenditures towards the cloud. One of the problems that is occurring is that organizations, and these are three large organizations making these statements, the first one being CIO, Forbes, and Gartner, are saying, hey, our biggest problem is that while we want to adopt these technologies, and remember, these organizations are speaking for hundreds and thousands of other organizations, our problem is there's an enormous skills and knowledge gap about cloud that is slowing our adoption of these technologies. So what do we do about that? How do we help resolve those roadblocks? Well, within the organizations themselves, they are going to get past this because digital transformation or transformation of the organization in one manner or another is a strategic initiative and it's not going to stop. So organizations have the opportunity to train internally, train existing personnel. They can hire, they can recruit folks that have the needed skills from the outside, which we're hearing a lot. We're hearing organizations saying, we're going to hire our way out of this problem. Okay, but what does that mean to the folks in the organization? If we're going to go on a big hiring spree, the folks with outdated backgrounds within your organization or that don't have those skills will eventually find themselves looking for another job and probably trying to catch up with reskilling so that they can get a new job, right? Outsourcing is always scary to us, right? If you're in a job now and you hear your organization talking about outsourcing or acquisitions to resolve the skills gap, that means that there's going to be a portion of that workforce that is going to be displaced through the outsourcing program. And acquisitions typically lead to reduction in force events as well. So How do we prepare for that? And how do we deal with this at all levels, whether it's education, hiring, outsourcing, or acquisitions? Well, let's take a little detour and look at what's happening in the world today with job skills, and then we'll sort of address that question. 10 years ago, even 20 years ago, entry-level IT jobs were some of the best paying jobs that you could get out there. I took this this little snapshot from ZipRecruiter.com because it's one of the most prominent providers of basically job sourcing in the market, and they have good data. And one of the things I noted was that an entry-level network administrator job 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when we were hiring or doing a lot of hiring in this space, people are certainly making, even at the low end, significantly more money today than they were back then. But the big deal is how these jobs are advertised. Nowadays, what you see is these entry-level network administrator jobs, and they have a great description. They have a huge list of requirements of the person, and they don't tell you how much they're going to pay you. So you actually have to go through the interview process or talk to somebody, and then you can ascertain about what the value of that job might be. Take a look at the low end, the high end, and the median here. 64,000 a year. That's probably a reasonable low end side of that for an entry level. We'll call it Cisco Network Administrator, or CCNA. Average 90,000 a year. Obviously, this has to do with geographies, and we're talking about the United States. And at the high end, 124,000, usually larger corporations with bigger benefits. Okay, but let's look at a contrast to that in sort of entry to mid-level cloud-based job salaries. Okay, first of all, you look at a difference here, because the reason I didn't put job titles or the job titles they're advertising for on this slide is because they didn't advertise what they were willing to pay. And that's because it's not competitive with what you're seeing in the cloud job market opportunity, or the market space for folks with cloud backgrounds. So if you look here, we're seeing, oh man, entry-level positions are in the $80,000 range for somebody with cloud knowledge and skills. Okay, as you move up the ranks just a little bit to something that we'll call maybe a systems architect or a solutions architect, still at very entry level, you're over $125,000 to $150,000 a year in that role. Okay, so the opportunity for people to fill those knowledge and skills gaps that we're seeing in these organizations that we just talked about are huge, right? But how do you get there, I suppose, is the next question you need to ask yourself. Right? Well, one way to get there is certainly you could just walk in the door and possibly land a job with one of these organizations if you're a good salesperson. You can sell yourself well. But most organizations, and I spent a lot of time hiring personnel, will look first at your credentials. Do you have any higher level education, military service, or perhaps industry certifications? And the reason we look for those types of things is we, number one, look to see if the candidate that we're trying to hire or looking to hire is goal-oriented and can finish what they start. And I don't care if that's a college degree, an associate's degree, a military background, or nowadays, it's more pertinent than ever, training and these certifications, right? You need to demonstrate that you worked hard to learn and understand the technologies that you'll be working with. We don't expect you to necessarily to be an expert in these areas, but we do expect that you have a baseline understanding so we can take you from there, put you with our more expert personnel to mentor you and bring you up to the level that we need within the organization. So that's why certifications are important. They get you in the door. They get you the interview. And after that, you're on your own. You have to prove your skills from there, right? What we do at Sunset Learning is we really take people on a lifelong learning journey. So if you start your career at one level or even with one technology and you want to move to another one, we'll help you with that. Okay. If we look at, this is just an example. This happens to be AWS because this session was all about AWS. And if you'll look at this, we have positions, or we have certifications at the foundational level. That's the cloud practitioner associate or cloud practitioner level. That's where you learn a lot. AWS has over 200 services and tools that they offer as cloud or that are provisioned via the cloud. So that class goes through about 80 of those to take you through an understanding of what the breadth of the most commonly used services are by people. And then there's a test associated with that. If you can convey to AWS that, hey, I kind of understand most of what you talked about there and why I might use those tools to move my business forward, then you can attain that foundational certification. From there, you might move on to one of these associate certifications that we see here, where you have a solutions architect associate, a systems operations administrator, or a developer. So solutions architect means that I can competently, at the associate level, begin to design an AWS cloud solution for my organization. So upon evaluating the needs of my organization, their business needs during that digital transformation that we want to go through, I can start, number one, recommending a cloud-based solution or a cloud and hybrid-based solution that would best meet our needs. I think, okay, I'm sorry. Marina says she's not 100% clear the conclusion I made out of those salary graphs. I think the thing to take away from that is that I brought the traditional sort of Cisco networking administrator job salary graph up to demonstrate to you that that has remained relatively the same over the last 5 years, maybe 6 years or so. There hasn't been a huge increase there. And in fact, it kind of topped out at a particular range. Now, of course, if you were more advanced, that was sort of entry-level position, right? If you're more advanced in your career with Cisco and Cisco certifications, you may earn more than that, right? You may earn significantly more than that. But the growth potential has slowed significantly on the traditional networking engineer side of the salary, where in the cloud space, those salaries are just going crazy, and it's all about demand. Right? It's all about the fact that there's enormous demand, a huge skills gap out there, and folks just need to hire these types of people that can move their organizations forward by taking advantage of the cloud, right? Does that help a little bit? Okay, thanks, Marina. Thanks for asking that question too. Sometimes I could be more clear. So my wife tells me that all the time. All right, then. So at the, let's see, we talked about solutions architect. That's where you will design cloud solutions. At the SysOps administrator level, this is where you'll be doing the day-to-day administration and maybe even the implementation that the solutions architect designed, right? So you'll be out there building those services or managing those services from a day-to-day basis. On the developer side, that's where you're actually going to develop the software that runs on these systems. So you're going to maybe take advantage of AWS services, hook into their application programming interfaces, and build those complex applications that really help transform the user experience for your customers at the user interface side of things. So those are kind of the associate level certifications. Then beyond those, you can move up to the more professional level certifications. So of course, with more experience and additional testing, you can earn the solutions architect professional certification and the DevOps engineer professional certification, which would sort of be synonymous if you're familiar with maybe Cisco or Microsoft certifications, like that Microsoft MCSEs type certification or the Cisco CCNP type certification. That's kind of the level in AWS land you would be at. What I find interesting about it, about AWS certifications, is they tend to be very challenging if you take them seriously to earn those certifications. And what I mean by taking them seriously is there are a lot of different ways, and there always has been, to sort of cheat the system and gain certifications without really knowing what you should know and the foundational skills, because they have these test prep types of things. What we're seeing AWS move to, and we saw Cisco do this a long time ago, is they're moving to more simulations, lab simulations, and those types of things in the certification tracks, so that not only do you have to have the knowledge, but you also have to be able to apply that knowledge when you take the exams. So those exams are starting to change. The SysOps administrator exam just changed that more practical hands-on type of certification. So those are things that I think, what I find is AWS certifications are quite challenging because they require a breadth of knowledge and the hands-on experience. You also have these specialty certifications, if you will, and these take you down a path of whether, I have folks come to class who are involved in data analytics. We have folks who come to class that are deeply involved in networking, like Mark here. And we'll have those folks that are specialized in creating databases, or increasingly now folks that are involved with machine learning and artificial intelligence. I think we'll see more certifications come from AWS. We'll probably see one in the contact center space. We'll probably see something about, we certainly have the security space. And I think what we saw one of those in that chart, one of the higher paying jobs, even at the entry level, is in the security space. So one of the interesting things is when you start putting resources into the cloud, all of the vendors have done a very good job of putting security controls out there for you to use to protect your resources. But it's your responsibility to actually implement those controls properly to protect your resources. So having a great understanding of security is going to be very valuable for people going forward. It is today, even on premises-based implementations. Okay. So what do we do then? How do we get started? At Sunset Learning, what we do is we create, and this is just a couple of examples of learning paths that we might create for you from a personal standpoint. We'll sit down, we'll talk to you, we'll do a little bit of an assessment of where you are today, a little bit of a gap analysis, if you will. And then we might recommend, okay, if you're just getting started, maybe we'll say, you know, everybody should really have this cloud practitioner background as a baseline, because it just gives you a good understanding, in AWS land anyway, it gives you a good understanding of what what their cloud offer is about, and a lot of the tools and services they provide. So we might recommend you sit through the class. The class happens to be one day. You can also get that information online if you're very diligent about doing online work. And I'm going to ask you a little bit about that towards the end of this. We might recommend that you go through and do some hands-on work to just kind of, if you're a tactile learner like I am, you learn faster through your fingertips than you do through your ears, right, and eyes. So I put my hands on things and I learn things. There's a lot of reading, videos, and other things that we recommend. And then when you get through there, you might have a question, and you might have more than one questions. Typically, I have a list of questions. And so you want to bring that to one of our instructors or subject matter experts and say, hey, I just don't understand what you're talking about. This EC2 thing that you're talking about, explain more to me about how that works. So we'll do some one-on-one mentoring, and then we'll move you through some exam prep type of work. So we'll ensure, because all of us have seen these exams, we kind of know what, we don't know all the questions, but we know the way people will ask you questions. For example, on the cloud practitioner exam, we're kind of interested in you understanding how and why you might apply some of these services that AWS is presenting from a business perspective. In the solutions architect path, we might do the same thing, but we might ask you the how and the why, and of course the what you might do when you're trying to implement or solve a particular technology problem for a customer, because you're expected to design architectures in AWS that meet the needs of the customer, right? So you have to kind of think about how you would answer questions in that sort of case study type of environment. So we tend to spend a little bit more time on the exam prep sessions going through that type of thing, right? The case studies or the use case scenarios that you might have. Anyway, that really, hopefully this session gave you a little bit of understanding of how you can leverage certifications and where the market is hot right now for certified individuals. What we have, I think, coming up is we're going to do a one-day training event called the AWS Discovery Day. It's sponsored by AWS. And there's no labs or anything as part of this, but we'll go through, I think this is a 3-hour session, if I'm not mistaken. And I think I'm actually presenting that session, but we'll go through and we'll take you through some of the Amazon Web Services basics in that session. So you might find that interesting to you. It's free. Isn't it free? I think it's free. It's free. So sign up for that session if you're interested in learning more about AWS. And that's a good precursor to that Cloud Practitioner Essentials course. And we also have a great deal on our Cloud Practitioners Essential course. Looks like our team has made it $150, which is a pretty good deal because it normally sells for $695. So take advantage of that. Let's see, that's going to run on October 25th and November 15th. So apparently you sign up for that using this AWS 150 promo code. So did I see what you have? One of our account managers on the call here, Darren. So you can contact Darren. Hi, Darren.
You can contact me, but yeah.
So anyway, I appreciate you all coming for this session and giving me your attention there and asking your questions and providing your feedback. I hope you found this useful. But if you have any other questions, I'm here. Feel free to ask. If there's anything you came to this session expecting that I didn't cover for you, now's your opportunity to ask because I'm here. So, and if there's nothing else, I hope you have an awesome weekend and good luck with your certification careers.